Most companies have a GTM strategy, but very few have a GTM that actually gets the money. If your go-to-market feels like a series of broken spreadsheets and missed targets, it's time for a system update. Welcome to GTM, get the money live. I'm Chris Ryan and I'm Lee Parillo, your hosts, and we're here to install the operating system for your revenue. We're moving past the theory and getting into the high-stakes execution of what it takes to scale in 2020 fast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to GTM, Get the Money Live. I am excited to share. We have another stellar guest. I'm going to introduce Catherine Kate Potvin, depending on what she goes by today. She's an amazing person. She is the owner and founder of Stragility. They're a company that aligns people, priorities, and accountability. I found it extremely impressive that you said you put accountability as something you solve. So I'm really curious to talk about that today. The point of GTM, Get the Money, if you haven't been here, like the millions of listeners that we have, it is all about you. It's not about us. We're not here for subscribers. We're here to provide value. We're here to solve revenue problems at the end of the day. We've solved tons of revenue problems for our clients. All of our guests live in the revenue world, but it's not just revenue for the greedy sake of revenue. It's because it's a force for good. So if you bring revenue to good companies and good people, they reward people around them, or they should, themselves, their family, their employees, their team, the community, etc. That's the entire point of the show. So hopefully you take away something valuable. It's 26 minutes only in 26. So we're going to get the clock started, but please welcome Catherine Kate Potvin. What do you go by? Let's start with that. What's your favorite?
You know, I love Catherine, but Kate is like, it's when people get to know me, they start calling me Kate. Kate. So, and there's this whole, it's kind of funny. It actually started with EO, who you're familiar with. People at EO were like, wait, why do certain people get to call you Kate? And we have to call you Catherine. I'm like, you call me whatever you want.
All right. So you like Catherine. Let me just restate that. You like Catherine, but Kate is okay if I know you better. So what should I call you? We'll go for that.
Oh, definitely Kate. I mean, we've worked on projects together. We've like got in the weeds.
Several times. So good little backstory of us. So obviously, like we've solved, that's a good point in the segue. We've solved revenue problems together. Like we've helped joint projects. We worked with other strategic partners. So focusing on revenue and growth stalls, we'll say, where are the biggest gaps that you see in your world? Probably a little helpful to tell them about Stragility and what you focus on, and then we can go into the biggest gaps because I think that'll parlay nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. So super quick, Stragility is a boutique business and management consulting firm specifically focused on developing the right strategies, turning that into the plan, and more importantly, focusing on the execution accountability of that plan. We also provide the market insights that are valuable for developing the strategies. And really, actually, at the end of the day, it's all about the talent, the people, the human capital, right? So getting those people in the right seats, getting them aligned on the priorities of the business. So it really starts there with the accountability structure. And oftentimes people blip over the people part of it, and that just creates ultimate chaos and lack of accountability. So we love to say that we're the boutique version of the larger global consulting firms, but we're also very personalized and customized in our approach. So we really get to know our clients, we're their top advisors, and we really look to solve their issues, their challenges, to find their opportunities in a way that works for them.
It's interesting that you say you solve the people problems because I think, speaking for ourselves, most people come to us for tactics, right? Where can we get quick leads? Where can we get quick wins? Very rarely does someone come to us and say we have a people problem. So would you say your strength is solving the upstream problems? Like you figure out what to do beforehand. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, everybody comes to us, they're like, oh, we need to define our priority. A lot of the time there's just, it's more chaotic because they haven't defined their focus with what they're going to lean into that year. But what we find is that actually, usually a lot of the time, it starts with the people. Everybody loves to throw around the phrase, right people, right seats. But oftentimes companies aren't true to that. They don't know how to define that accountability structure that is current state as well as future state. So, what's the structure that's going to help you get to that next level, but also focus on what you're doing now? And all of that relates back to revenue. So, if people know exactly what their roles are, what success looks like in their position, what they're accountable for, what do they own? So, let's take the revenue guy, right? There's so many people that touch revenue in a company. And really, you have to ultimately define who owns it. And then how are all of the people that touch the client experience working together to generate that revenue? But ultimately, who owns it? And so we start there. So it's not just revenue, right? It's operations, it's marketing, it's finance, it's HR. Those are the major functions of any organization. And then what are the nuances, right? So client services, if you are in media activation, digital innovation. So where are some nuances with that accountability structure? But again, what's the right structure? Structure first, and then who are the right people that have the knowledge and experience to fill those roles?
Gotcha. Okay. So structure, right people, right seats. I mean, you hear that all the time, right? And you're right. Revenue belongs to everyone at the end of the day. But I like that you said somebody owns it. Who do you typically see, or who would you recommend that owns revenue? Like, it makes sense if they have like a CRO, right? If
Right.
they're a bigger company or if they're a bigger C-suite. But you work with small businesses, you work with Fortune 100 companies. Who do you think owns revenue on the majority of the time?
Everybody likes to say that it's yes, chief revenue officer for larger companies. Some smaller companies do use that, but it's less about the title and more about, the person with the business development and the sales experience and knowledge and competencies. Who is that person to fill that role? Regardless of title, it's really thinking about who is the person that has the right profile to fill that role. So it could be VP of sales, but that gets a little tricky too, because sometimes they're focused just on bottom line, and there's a lot more that goes into it, like thinking about all the other people that touch the client and how can they work with them, collaborate with them within the company.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the point of the show, when we're GTM guys and gals, right? It's about aligning, making sure everyone owns revenue at some point. It's about getting the right fit clients in the door so you don't churn them down the road and lose revenue. You can grow them, people you want to work with, et cetera. But I like the idea of it's somebody's accountable for revenue specifically. That's an interesting play because, our model, revenue for good, revenue for growth, is so talk about the people problems that you see, whether somebody's owning it or not, but talk about like what are the gaps from the people side of.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have your accountability, and I don't say org structure because org structure is focused on titles, and I could care less about titles. It's more focusing on the functions of the organization that drive that revenue growth and can focus on the priorities. And it's a really cool exercise that we take companies through, leadership teams through. So, people issues that we often see start at the top, no surprise. And again, a lot of what we're talking about today, Chris, it's not new, but people have to ask themselves if they're doing it because they're not most of the time, which is why people like you and I have jobs. So, they're well intentioned, but the follow through can be a little iffy and messy. So, I would ask people as they're listening to this, yes, you're like, oh, yeah, I know that, but ask the question, are we really doing it? Have we set it up correctly? Are we following through on it? And is there that accountability and results that we're looking for? So, with that said, I do want to focus on one of the major people issues is leadership behaviors and discipline. And I do see that leaders are well intended, but their follow through with how they behave on a daily basis is inconsistent. And inconsistency is one of the biggest killers for a business. And examples would be a leader who says, oh, yeah, we're all about trust and respect, but undermine their team. They retaliate against feedback. They change their minds consistently. and then wonder why people don't know what the path forward is. And they often say things such as, well, I can change my mind. I'm the leader. And I disagree with that. I think that if you are the leader, you are held to a different expectation, a different level, and the way you behave, we all know this, will trickle down. So if you are saying that these are the priorities, this is how we're going to do, this is how I'm going to support you as the leader, stick to that, right? Put the structure in place and hire the people that you're going to train and upskill, and then trust them to do their job, right? We've heard this a million times. However, I've seen it also fail a million times. And leaders throw around servant leadership. Many of them actually don't know what that means. It's if you're going to say it, you have to live it and you have to really understand it. And so that's where we see a lot of gaps, is the leadership behaviors and discipline, because that will ultimately affect everything a company does.
So I have a lot of comments there. I want to unpack that because there's a lot of different things I heard. Makes sense, right? The leader is potentially having communication issues. They're a visionary. They're a leader. They're just throwing out things and thinking everybody understands what's happening. That happens, guilty, right? Like I do that all the time and just think my team does that. Thankfully, there's people to help. But you mentioned leadership behaviors and consistency. Like what I heard were maybe behaviors, but can you bring somebody back? Because it sounds like a company or a leader who's micromanaging or not standing up to their core values that, potentially the marketing team gave them. Can they be saved, for lack of a better word?
Some can, yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. I probably say this line a dozen times a day. Understand the profile of not only the leaders, but every single person in your company, and know what you can't change about that profile and know what can be adjusted through coaching if the person is open to it. So people are really who they are, and the ones that are open to making things better will be the better leaders. However, a lot of people say that they're open to improving, but again, lack of follow through there. So focus on what you can control with the people that you have, because inherently our profiles are, we are who we are. So, there's a bunch of ways to do that. We all know DISC, Myers-Briggs, predictive index, but I say to everyone, this leader, this is the profile of this leader. These are the things that are not going to change, even though you want them to. So your choice is twofold. Work with the leader as they are, knowing that they're not open to change, or find another leader that is more your style.
That's a good point. I mean, I'm more familiar with this than everything else. I've heard of the other ones. I've heard of Colby, so it's some of the other indexes. What's interesting is sometimes, and I've seen this on the other side of the coin, right? Sometimes people come across as leaders and they're not being cold or insensitive. It's just how they're wired. Like you have that engineer, professionally developed personality, for lack of a better word. Like they just come across because they have a systematic way of thinking, where you have like the fun, bubbly people who are of a different play, that people that are very direct. Like obviously, I think you and I are two very direct people, and people just think that's, like, oh, he doesn't care or she doesn't care. And it's not that. It's just that's how they communicate. So you mentioned like part of structure and process. You will do assessments early on. Is that like the first thing you do to figure out the
Yeah.
people?
Absolutely. So ideally, it's part of the onboarding process with a new hire. But obviously, if teams are established, it really is about giving each individual, going through the predictive index process. That's what I'm trained in. And I have found I know DISC and Myers-Briggs as well, but it really gives people a perspective on every other single person in the company and how they can obviously know themselves, but know the other people. How can you better communicate with the other people? Do the other people like process and detail? Where are their strengths? How do they like flexibility more than, sticking to structure? These are all super important things that I've learned throughout the decades, that you have to know the other people in your business environment. A lot of the time, what I see is it's the leader or leadership saying, well, they should know us and they should learn how to work with us. It's twofold. It's not just one way. And so if you can understand other people, because everybody just wants to be heard and understood. So therefore, it's a great tool to do that, but also remember who you're talking to at any given time. Like you said, you and I are more very straightforward, real, direct it doesn't mean that we don't value other people's opinions. I'm told I have a dominant personality. I manage that with other, allegedly. I I manage my communication knowing that. And that's been a learning moment for me for a decade now, because I knew I had to change the way that I communicate with people. So that's very important, is to understand other individuals.
And that's not easy because we've done the same assessments and like trying to be aware and cognizant of like the other person if they're a complete opposite communicator of you. It is
Yes.
really hard if you're used to getting quick information or if you need to think things over. So I totally get that. So you run the assessments, you go through the leadership team. I don't love the my way or the highway type of governance in any type of company. Those are kind of the companies that, can't help themselves. My personal opinion. But what about like what do you do after? So do you debrief with the team? Does everybody kind of have a kumbaya moment? And then it's like you talk this way and I hear this. Or
Yeah, so it's a workshop, it's not touchy-feely, because that's just, I try to stick to the realities and the facts. And here's the thing, I do understand that about myself. So I do have a real executive coach where she balances me out. So I can bring her in to help facilitate these conversations with leadership if I feel that that's necessary. And I do ask, opinions if that would be necessary. So it really is about, again, during these workshops, understanding each other. But how do we follow through on this? How do we carry it through? Because oftentimes I'll get calls from people and they're saying, I'm really having a really hard time with so and so. And my feedback is always, let's start with their profile. And didn't
gotcha.
you forget how they like to be communicated with? My husband and I are exact opposite profiles. And it took me a long time to understand that I can't just come in, say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. And he needs time to process. He needs time to make decisions. And we had to come to a happy medium where he can't take forever to make decisions. And sometimes I need to not pressure him to make a decision in 5 seconds.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's the same in my life, like me and my wife are very, which is why it works. What I think is interesting is like tying this back to revenue. If you don't have these open lines of communication and really understand the people you're working with, like, yes, it's one thing to have water cooler talk, but it's another thing to truly understand and have some level of empathy to know what they're going through and how they'll take your information. I guarantee if you have this like culture of unknown, you will lose people. You could lose some key people because they just have a toxic relationship with somebody else when it just could be communication styles and they feel like this person's coming at me or this person's playing the victim or whatever it is. See, it's a funny question, but do you think all companies have these problems? So you've worked with
Yes.
hundreds. Okay, got it.
Different levels of, but because there are some companies that I walk into, I'm like, oh, they're actually doing a really good job. But ultimately, these issues will come up in some way, shape, or form. And some companies are faster learners than others and get it. They move forward with it. Everybody wants to be understood. And to be understood, you have to understand their profile, whether or not you like it, whether or not it's not the same as yours. And understanding leads to trust. And when you have trust with another person, which I've seen such a lack of trust in so many companies, and everybody loves to throw, oh, no, we trust each other. I'm like, no, you don't. And when you trust, you can collaborate quicker, you can make decisions quicker, and you can make revenue faster, right? So if you don't trust, there's all sorts of roadblocks. People leave, like you said, usually good people. And so it's the speed of trust matrix that we always go back to, right? When trust is high, collaboration is high, it's an economic driver. And people don't understand that trust is an economic driver.
Yeah, it is. It's an economic preventer if you think about it, because it
Yeah.
just inhibits growth. And people don't know these things are happening. And if you take yourself out of the business world and just kind of think about this from a common sense perspective, nobody's going to work to have a bad time or have a bad work-life balance. Like everybody has their own thing. We all have stuff going on, et cetera. But still, it's like maybe there's a poison pill one or two times. I found in my life the people that I have a hard time communicating with tend to be some of the more valuable conversations because I learn something every single time. I
Yeah.
learn something about the people that need to think things over when I act quickly and I'm okay making a mistake. And then, to their point, if you thought about it a little longer, maybe you wouldn't have made the mistake. So it is kind of bringing us together in this. I keep going back to this kumbaya. We're going to sit around a fire and do this, but it does directly lead to not only just revenue, but their overall mental health, the
Yeah.
company's health, like how, we interact, like really good companies, like people get each other, right? They have fun, they have good time, but they know when to push, they know when not to push. So I think we're all trying to create that at some level. I
Yeah.
don't love that every company has these issues, but it's nice to hear that some companies are good.
They do. It's that's what I say. I'm like, it's no company is perfect. Every company has their issues. And, if you focus on the people part first and like really do it correctly and not just throw out the, oh no, we definitely have the right people in the right seats. Because then when we come in, we're like, in what world do you have the right people in the right seats? Because we're not seeing it. And, and people again are well intentioned. The guy that's been there for 30 years, they want to make him a leader, even though he
Right.
doesn't, it's so we've seen it a million times. But if you start with the people, then you can actually focus on the planning and the execution, which ultimately leads to revenue. And people are, I've literally heard people say to me, we don't need a plan. We just go, we just do it. We show up and we just do it. And I'm like, okay, you show up and do what? It's just, they're like, well, we focus on the money. And like my left eye starts to twitch. And it's not because we do planning as part of a major service area, but lack of focused planning creates chaos that kills revenue. And I'm not talking you have to go through this overwhelming strategic planning process because our thing is we make it simplified, streamlined, focused. I don't want to be overwhelmed. You don't want to be overwhelmed. It's, you know, a lot of companies think they just need to do more, 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 and they pivot every 2 seconds. And that's the thing that kills the revenue. They need
Yeah.
to do less. They need to focus. They need to spend a day putting a plan together. And then more importantly, who's accountable for what? How are we executing? What are the milestones? We know all of this. So focus is one of the most underrated revenue strategies. I'll say that again because
Wow.
focus is one of the most underrated revenue strategies. And that's why, again, people hear me say the word focus 52,000 times because many companies don't have it. They think,
Yeah.
oh, we're going here, we're doing this, we're in this market. Right? I'm like, oh my God, what's happening right now? And here's the thing, the team, going back to the people, they don't know. So they're showing up every day saying, I've heard this from team members. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what I should be working on. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So lack of focused planning is chaos that masquerades as growth.
That's
And
good.
because think we're busy, so we must be generating revenue.
We could have ended the entire live show on that last diatribe, we'll say. But good job. No, it's interesting. You're right, and it's funny you say focus because I've been in dozens of meetings with you, and that's the one thing that I always hear you say is focus, focus, focus. So people trust brings clarity, alignment. The team gets together, and then that will produce revenue. So all these things are great. When you leave, how does a company operate? So like, let's pretend they hired you for whatever your engagement is. I have to imagine you're coming in and kind of training the trainer, coaching the coach, whatever you want to say. Is that what you're doing? Like, is there somebody who's responsible, who's accountable? Let's bring us all the way back to be in the K after they leave, to kind of call BS if it's happening.
Yeah, so I always have that key stakeholder that I'm working with. And there's a couple of different ways that we do this. We follow certain methodologies where there is that, accountability structure that has the visionary, the integrator, the leadership team. And, so the integrator is usually they're the executor. So they are the person that I am working with to really teach the tools and the process of how to do a focus plan. That's one option. That's very simplified and straightforward. The other option is a larger strategic planning engagement where there is and this is where you and I collaborate nicely, right? That market research analysis, validation, how can we make the best decisions for the company? So we're doing the work for them and then we can develop the plan. And really we stay on with our retention rate is very, very high from year to year because we are that outsourced accountability partner that teaches them how to execute, really teaches them what accountability means and make sure not only that there's progress, but let's clear some roadblocks. Are opportunities still the same, right? So having that external advisement. So our retention rate about how we work with clients is very high from year to year because we're that accountability partner.
You'll come in and do some level of reinforcement too then, right?
Yes.
Go ahead and do it, but we're gonna check it. So we're not just coming in and telling you what to do. Yeah. Because honestly, we need that in all of our lives. We need a health coach, we need a gym coach, like whatever it is. For our millions of listeners, what's one takeaway if people are not assessing their people, or if they're worried about trust, or if they're worried about how this impacts revenue? What's one takeaway that somebody can do today listening to this show?
The companies that win aren't working harder. They're clear on ownership. So that accountability structure, who owns what, especially revenue and how they're collaborating. They're disciplined in their leadership behaviors, truly disciplined. They walk the walk, they talk the talk. And they're intentional about how revenue actually gets generated, which is let's prioritize and less is more. And they don't take their eye off the ball. So as a business owner, sometimes people think that they can go on vacation every other second. And, good for you if you have the company operating the way that you want it to, and you've got the right people, the right plan, and the right execution. But don't take your eye off the ball. It's always a bad idea. Less is more.
All right. We're a little over time. I'm going to do 2 quick minutes. One quick mystery question, which is kind of a thing that I think is super fun. It's different every single time. It's always based on revenue. Let's get our heads out of the accountability leadership and let's look inward at ourselves. If I was to give you $100,000 cash and said you had to spend it on your top competitor, what would you do?
I had to spend it on my top competitor? What do you mean?
Correct. That's why it's a mystery question. You have to pick a campaign, pick something that you would do for them.
For a competitor?
Correct. Hence the mystery question.
$1,000 that I would focus on a competitor to help them, essentially.
You see, that's the trick. You can do either. You can help them or hurt them. Like, what would you do?
Obviously, I would help them. And yeah, I would focus the money on their people. I would look to see who needs additional training. Do they need to hire? So spending money towards, 100,000 isn't a ton of money, but who could they hire that would really give them more of a competitive edge based upon their priorities? So that's what I would do.
Okay. Fair enough. You don't get stumped that often, but I like that. I like the help angle. I like to hear other people. And hey, I like that you were a little reluctant to say that because I think that's a little funny and a good takeaway. All right. Kate from Stragility. I can never say your company's name. Where can people find you?
They can find me. They can find Catherine Potvin on LinkedIn. Obviously, we have a website, Stragility LLC, which is actually in the process of being updated. Q1 is one of our focus areas. The whole year we're focusing on marketing, but have to update the website. It's a little outdated. I'm embarrassed to say, but yes, Stragility LLC. And then there's Instagram, which is just at Stragility LLC. And then you can find my email on any of those.
Gotcha. We will not put your email out to the masses, but so thank you again. It's been a good show. I like that. I appreciate all of the patience and kind of the back and forth. It's been good. So it's a different angle than we typically hear about revenue.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We will all check you out after. And that was this episode of GTM Get the Money.
Thank you.
We go